I love America, but the America I love is not a slogan, and it is not a bumper sticker. When a major news organization feels the need to announce, "We love America, no apologies," that alone should make you pause. Because love, real love, does not need to be shouted. And patriotism, real patriotism, is not obedience. We are being pushed toward a dangerous binary. Either you love America their way or you hate it. Either you defend power or you're disloyal. That framing is not accidental. It is political, and it is profoundly un-American. In recent years, backlash against the far left has been real, but that backlash has been weaponized not to strengthen democracy, but to excuse its erosion. What's sold as loving America increasingly means ignoring abuses, normalizing cruelty, and silencing dissent. If that makes you uncomfortable, stay with me, because what we're really debating is not ideology. It's the meaning of the country itself. And in the next part, I want to define the question we've been avoiding. If this resonates, keep watching. So let's be precise about the question in front of us. This is not a debate between loving America and hating it. It's a struggle over how love is defined and who gets to define it. On one side is a loud, simplified idea of patriotism. America as something you defend reflexively. America as something beyond criticism. America as power, strength, dominance. Questioning authority in this view is treated as betrayal. On the other side is a quieter, older tradition. One that sees America not as a finished product, but as an argument. A representative democracy built on rules, limits, and self-correction. A country strong enough to face its own failures without collapsing. The danger is not criticism. The danger is the claim that criticism itself is illegitimate. Because once loving America means excusing anything done in its name, there are no brakes left, no guardrails, no shared reality. To understand how we arrived here, we have to step back not to slogans, but to context. And that context matters more than ever. To understand this moment, you have to understand the cycle America keeps repeating. Periods of expansion, moral, political, cultural, are almost always followed by backlash. When rights broaden, when voices multiply, when history gets re-examined, fear rushes in to fill the gap. Fear of loss, fear of displacement, fear that the country no longer belongs to people like us. In recent decades, America did something rare. It confronted parts of its own past. Slavery, segregation, systemic exclusion. Not perfectly, not completely, but seriously enough to expand civil rights and public consciousness. That process was messy, uneven, and often uncomfortable, which made it politically exploitable. A small but visible segment of the far left pushed that reckoning into absolutism. America as irredeemable, capitalism as pure evil, speech as violence. For many Americans, that felt less like justice and more like accusation. Enter the backlash. Political actors seized on it, magnified it, and repackaged it as existential threat. They hate America. They want to erase you. They're coming for your way of life. And just like that, nuance collapsed. What followed wasn't a return to balance, but a swing to the other extreme. And in the next part, we'll look at the first moment when that swing turned into something far more dangerous. The first real rupture didn't come quietly. It came with a vote. In 2024, Americans chose Donald Trump again, even after an attempted self-coup, even after years of institutional sabotage, even after norms most democracies treat as sacred were openly mocked. That decision was not made in ignorance. It was made in anger. A large part of the country wasn't voting for a vision. They were voting against something else. Against activists who seemed to despise the nation itself. Against elites who spoke the language of morality but not of consequence. Against a cultural left that often confused persuasion with punishment. That anger was real. But what followed was something else entirely. Because the backlash did not stop at rejecting excesses. It became permission. permission to excuse authoritarian behavior, permission to reframe lawlessness as strength, permission to treat democratic guardrails as inconveniences. History is clear about moments like this. Democracies rarely fall from ideological takeover. They fall when fear convinces people that order matters more than rules. If you're thinking, that sounds familiar, you're not wrong. And in the next part, we'll examine the machinery that turned that fear into a governing system. What makes this moment so dangerous isn't chaos, it's structure. Authoritarian drift doesn't arrive screaming, it arrives organized, through systems that still look legal, through language that still sounds patriotic, through institutions that are bent, not broken, until one day they no longer resist at all. The mechanism works like this. First, redefine loyalty. Loving the country becomes synonymous with supporting the leader. Criticism is recast as sabotage. Journalists become enemies. Courts become obstacles. Elections become suspicious by default. Second, normalize exception. Due process is inconvenient. Civil liberties are conditional. Violence is regrettable but necessary. Each step is justified as temporary. Each violation framed as a response to crisis. Third, flood the zone. Scandal after scandal, outrage after outrage, until nothing shocks anymore. When everything feels abnormal, people stop recognizing what truly is. And finally, outsource cruelty. Bureaucracies are weaponized, policies are enforced by faceless agents. Responsibility dissolves into procedure. This is how a democracy hollows out without a single coup succeeding. And once this machinery is running, it doesn't need extremists at the edges. It runs on indifference at the center. In the next part, we'll confront the second crisis when the consequences stopped being theoretical and became personal. The second crisis was not symbolic. It was physical. When masked agents begin arresting people without due process, something fundamental has already broken. When citizens are grabbed, detained, or killed by the state with no transparency and no accountability, the argument is no longer abstract. Power has crossed from theory into flesh. During Trump's second term, this became normalized with alarming speed. Extralegal killings of alleged drug traffickers abroad were celebrated as strength. Constitutional limits were brushed aside as technicalities. And warnings that this logic would eventually turn inward were dismissed as hysteria. Then it did. The killing of Renee Good in Minneapolis by ICE agent Jonathan Ross wasn't an anomaly, it was a consequence. A system trained to see law as obstacle and force as virtue will eventually consume its own people. The reaction that followed the open celebration, the bloodlust, revealed how far the moral ground had already shifted. This is how democracies decay, not when abuses happen, but when they are cheered. And if you're thinking this has nothing to do with you, that illusion is exactly what allows it to continue. Because in the next part, we're going to talk about where this always lands, on you. If you're still watching, this is the part that matters most. Because this is where politics stops being abstract and starts being personal. When power no longer respects limits, you are no longer a citizen. You are a variable. It doesn't matter who you voted for. It doesn't matter what flag you wave. It doesn't matter how loudly you say you love America. Once due process becomes optional, your rights exist only until someone decides they don't. Maybe you don't protest. Maybe you don't organize. Maybe you think staying quiet keeps you safe. History says otherwise. A state that arrests without transparency doesn't stop at activists. A government that excuses violence doesn't carefully confine it. The machinery doesn't ask whether you deserve it. It only asks whether it can. And here's the hardest truth. The erosion doesn't feel dramatic at first. It feels administrative, paperwork, procedures, policies, until one day it's your name, your neighborhood, your silence being interpreted as consent. If this unsettles you, it should. Because loving a country means protecting the people inside it, not the power above them. If you believe that still matters, stay with me. The next part explains why the world is watching and why what happens here never stays here. What happens inside the United States never stays inside the United States. For decades, America's power wasn't just military or economic, it was moral. The idea, however, imperfectly lived up to that. The rule of law mattered, that rights were universal, that power restrained itself. That belief shaped alliances, stabilized regions, and kept worse actors in check. That advantage is fragile when the United States dismantles its own soft power, when it kills institutions like USAID that saved millions of lives at minimal cost. It doesn't create neutrality, it creates vacuums. And vacuums are always filled by warlords, despots, and authoritarian states eager to rewrite the rules. When American leaders flirt with ethnic grievance, others take notes. When US officials echo language that sounds disturbingly like Europe in the 1,930 seconds, extremists abroad feel validated. When figures close to power openly praise or boost far-right movements like Germany's AfD, it signals something chilling. The old red lines no longer hold. And when America treats international law as optional, threatening allies, invading without consultation, discarding the rules-based order, it tells the world that might really does make right. That lesson will be learnt. The question is, by whom and against whom? Because once global norms collapse, no border protects you. And in the final stretch, we need to confront the futures this path opens, and the one that still hasn't closed. If history teaches us anything, it's this. Systems don't collapse into a single future. They branch. From where we are now, America is staring at three plausible paths. The first is recovery. Institutions reassert themselves. Courts matter again. Law enforcement is restrained by law, not loyalty. Patriotism is decoupled from obedience, and criticism is understood as civic duty. This path doesn't require perfection, only correction. It is slow, frustrating, and deeply unglamorous. But it works. The second path is managed decline. Elections continue, but norms erode. Violence is rare, but always looming. Rights exist unevenly, applied generously to some and conditionally to others. The language of democracy remains, but its substance thins out. Many people adapt, life goes on, until it doesn't. The third path is the darkest and the most familiar historically. Power consolidates, loyalty replaces law. Enemies are defined internally. The state claims necessity, then permanence. At that point, recovery becomes exponentially harder because fear has replaced trust as the organizing principle of society. None of these futures is inevitable, but all of them are possible, and which one we move toward depends less on leaders and more on what citizens are willing to tolerate. That brings us to the final question. What does it actually mean to love a country when the cost is no longer theoretical? Loving a country is not a performance. It's a responsibility. It does not mean chanting the loudest. It does not mean defending the powerful. And it certainly does not mean pretending that cruelty, corruption, or lawlessness become virtues when wrapped in a flag. Real patriotism is harder than that. It means holding two truths at once: pride and shame, belonging and accountability. It means understanding that a nation is not its leaders, not its slogans, not its myths, but its rules, its limits, and the dignity it extends to the least protected among us. You can love America and still demand better from it. You can love America and apologize for its failures. You can love America because you refuse to let it become something unrecognizable. But if loving America requires you to excuse racism, ignore state violence, or cheer the erosion of democracy that isn't love, that's loyalty to power. And history is unforgiving to people who confuse the two. If this analysis challenged you, share it. If it clarified something you felt but couldn't name, stay with this conversation. Because the future of a country is not decided by slogans. It's decided by what its citizens refuse to accept.